We'd like to begin by recognizing and acknowledging that we are gathered together upon the traditional territories of the Erie, Neutral, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Mississaugas. The land beneath and around us is covered by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement, a pact between the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee to care for the lands around the Great Lakes. We share this land and celebrate its gifts, and are thankful to live and work in a place that has sustained human activity for over 15,000 years. As settlers, we acknowledge our responsibility to listen, learn, and evolve in the spirit of these historic covenants, honoring the earth, living in balance with the land, and taking only what we need. Honoring First Nations as we take on the important work of reconciliation. In doing so, we seek to forge new and respectful relationships with the Indigenous nations of this region and throughout Turtle Island. We strive to work collaboratively and to keep the importance of our shared history, friendship, and future relationships alive in our minds and hearts.
All right. Well, I would like to thank everybody for coming to watch us here as we open up our little mini conference it's very strange talking with nobody else in the room. We start our mini conference for the Reclaiming Hamilton launch here, and I'd to thank everybody who may be watching us online, and Supercrawl and all the wonderful people here who are helping us put this together. Normally when we do a launch or a conference for a book, we've got an audience and we've got people around, so it's very strange to do it this way. But we are making it happen, and we'd like to thank everybody for doing it, and our funders, the Canada Council for the Arts, the Ontario Arts Council, the Department of Canadian Heritage, everybody who makes it possible for us to do these kind of events. So my name is Noelle Allen, and I am the publisher of Wolsak and Wynn, which is a local publishing house. We are just on James Street North. We are in the heart of the city, and we love everything about Hamilton. And I'm taking a moment to introduce myself because I always forget to do that part. And we are here to talk about Reclaiming Hamilton, which is a fabulous anthology that we have just brought out, which is full of essays which talk about every part of the city. They talk about everything from our art scene, to the LRT, to the Red Hill Parkway, to the history of the city, all the things in between. And the person who has actually put this fabulous book together is sitting right beside me, and his name is Paul Weinberg. And I'm just going to tell you a little bit about Paul, and then we're going to talk about why he brought me this fabulous book. So Paul Weinberg is a veteran freelance journalist whose work has appeared in the Globe and Mail, the Toronto Star, the Hamilton Spectator, Canada's History, and many other publications. His most recent book is When Poverty Mattered, Then and Now, which was just published in October 2019 by Fernwood Publishing, and he currently lives in Hamilton, Ontario. And thank you for coming and sitting with me, Paul.
Hi.
Thank you. So let's talk about this book. So why did you bring this book? And by the way, it was a lot of work to put this book together. Why did you put this book together and bring it to me?
Well, I've lived in different places, and then living in Hamilton in 2013, I realized there was quite a buzz going on about the city. The city seemed very exciting. Compared to Toronto, which was the congestion and all the problems with the transit system, but in Hamilton, it seemed to be like like Toronto, but of an earlier period, where it was still possible to live downtown, and housing was relatively inexpensive. It was starting to go up, of course, but there was an art scene, art galleries. James Street North had become a two-way street, and there were these art galleries and restaurants. It started a few years earlier, but I had a friend from Hamilton who lives in Ottawa. He actually got Stevendale. He got this started, but he couldn't really. He lives in Ottawa, and it was difficult for him to balance going back and forth. So I became part of the project, and I ended up taking it over from him. And we just recruited a whole bunch of writers. In the meantime, I had approached you, and it was just a chancy thing. We just wanted to find out, suss you out. We didn't know you at all. And you expressed a lot of interest, and the job was to suddenly start recruiting people to write for it. And that wasn't too difficult because Hamilton has an strong activist community, writing blogs, writing articles, whether it's for the Spectator or more commonly on the internet. And so someone like Joey Coleman, a crowd-funded journalist, or Ryan McGreer would raise the hammer, or Sean Selway, a activist, tenant organizer. So there was a ready group of people willing to contribute, and that wasn't the problem. It was a lot of work putting it together, getting people to write the stuff, meet a deadline, and we went through a whole process of, first of all, and Stephen helped here, and then another person, Sarah Hepworth, and my partner, Kathy, we all looked at the original stuff, and then finally, at a certain stage, we handed it over to you and your trusty editor, and that was over a 3-year process, so.
Yeah, it was a long time to pull this together, and it's interesting to have seen like how the anthology has changed over the time from the original list of people that was possibly going to contribute to now. But I think we have some really fabulous pieces in there.
Yeah, yes, I'm very happy with the contributions, and all the contributors have been great working with them. A great bunch of people. It's been before COVID, I had them over to my house a couple times, just trying to figure out how to get this thing going, or just getting to know each other. But it's all done, and people get to read it, and I'm hoping it'll stimulate conversation about the city. I think there's an app, for a mid-sized Canadian city, sometimes there isn't enough discussion. Often, if you have a one newspaper town, it's you don't have a lot of avenues for discussion, how to make a city better. And I think this is an opportunity for maybe to kind of shake up the city a little bit, because we're a bit contrarian. We're not all rah-rah Hamilton. We love the city, but we also think there's room for improvement. That's why we call it Reclaiming Hamilton, not Revitalizing Hamilton. I got this idea from Graham, actually, who I interviewed for I forget his last name.
Graham Crawford?
That's right, for the book. His point was, and it's well thought out, is that he objected to the idea of revitalization. It implies there was nothing in the city before. And he says, no, the city's gone through its ups and downs. So that's a wrong phrase to use. So we decided to use the phrase reclaiming. It implies, yes, we're trying to improve and rebuild, but we're also taking what's valuable in the city that already exists, such as old buildings. I don't know, just there's a certain kind of spirit in the city of collectivity, collective ways of doing things, and just good neighborliness.
Yep. So in the book, you've actually contributed an essay.
Yes.
As well, which is a very long and thorough look at the Red Hill Parkway.
Yes.
So why did you pick that topic?
Well, because, I had been in Toronto and I knew about the Spadina Expressway. And Hamilton, it's a similar kind of battle for those who are not from Hamilton. The difference is that, in my opinion, the good guys lost. A beautiful valley was turned into this highway going through this floodplain, going through the River Creek Valley. And it seemed like a tremendous loss, because there aren't a lot of great parks in the east end of Hamilton. There's Gage Park, which is where I live near. So all those people want to get me after this know where I live. But anyway, so the expressway was a 50-year battle. It was 5 decades. It lasted for a long time. And there's some interesting people involved with it, like Don McLean, who I acknowledge from the book as one of the first people I met here when I moved and getting more involved in Hamilton. He provided a lot of insight through his newsletter. So the battle fascinated me, and there's different aspects to it. It's never been turned into a book. There's a PhD thesis on it, but no one has actually written a book on it. So, okay, this is an article, but better than nothing. But I tried to get into as much detail as I could. And I think it's kind of a forgotten thing. Often these battles are forgotten. The same thing with the one-way street, which is the other aspect. What I do, I wrote an article about the car culture and how there's a clash between two aspects of Hamilton. There's the park, there's the idea to preserve nature, and that's in the spirit of Thomas McQuestion, who preserved Cootes Paradise and had Gage Park designed. And then you have the other person who I think represents the car culture, and it's Ray Desjardins, who's a totally forgotten person. He was kind of the Robert Moses of Hamilton. He imposed what we see as the one-way street infrastructure today in Hamilton, including this idea that you can get across the city in 20 minutes. The traffic lights all synchronized on King and Main, and I guess that's showing my bias. I think there's something wrong. Every city has a car culture. Cars are dominate our lives. But I thought there was something interesting about the car culture in Hamilton. I saw the Red Hill Expressway, the one-way streets, and these two individuals helping to shape the city.
That makes sense. And I mean, the car culture essay that you have actually really mirrors, I think, another essay which is in the book, which is from Ryan McGreal
Right.
about the LRT. And there's a lot of similarities between the two. Do you agree?
Well, yes. Now, I didn't deal with transit. He gets into the issue of transit and how it's an incredible story about how the LRT was conceived. It was originally provincial government policy, and then what happens with politics and Queen's Park and the city, the personalities change and policies change, and trying to keep things on kilter. And Ryan it's a purely subjective piece. He was involved with the Hamilton Light Rail. I can't remember the name of the group, but his lobby group for the light rail and sort of grassroots group. I don't use the word lobby, grassroots kind of organization pushing the politicians, particularly when they kind of were in favor of it and then they lost sight of it and they go back and forth. And so he's tried to keep, and he's been very effective and then putting it together as a piece, so writing about it. It was a bit of a challenge. Till today, we don't know if the LRT is actually going to happen. The province is promising, is back saying yes, but maybe Hamilton might have to fork over some money, and that originally wasn't the idea. We were supposed to get $1 billion, so to fund it by the former government. So
yeah, it's the very long backwards and forwards, and the process of it. It just sounds like there's a theme for major events like this taking a very long time.
Well, that's right. It happens to all cities. Hamilton is not unique. I guess I've heard some complaints, well, Hamilton is bureaucratic and we always reject projects. There was a kind of another light rail going from the lower city onto the mountain. It was kind of like a sky train that Vancouver has that was rejected by the city. It was offered by Bill Davis. And so Hamilton has a history of rejecting things that might benefit. And so that's part of the debate about, well, can Hamilton kind of break this curse?
Yes. And I mean, besides the Red Hill Parkway and the LRT, we've also got some wonderful articles about the history of the city in there.
Well, that's it. You know, we've got the labor movement, the struggle for the Stelco strike in the 40s. And it's actually kind of forgotten. I mean, with the exception of a park named after a labor-leaning mayor, Sam Lawrence, the labor history is getting kind of forgotten in a way. So so we have an excellent piece called about Brightside, this neighborhood that used to exist in the industrial lands near Stelco, where Stelco is today, and it's two historians, Nancy Boucher and Ken Cruikshank. They wrote a wonderful book called People of the Bay, and this is somewhat in the same spirit of research. And this was a community that was a neighborhood right cheek and jowl with the steel industry, and then one day the steel industry, the Stelco, decided they wanted that property. So that neighborhood is gone. It doesn't exist anymore. But there are people who hold the flag for Brightside. They remember it very fondly, and they get together. And so this article is written in that spirit.
And there's that one, and I also think that another one by Sarah Wayland, which actually I think is one of the only sort of description of the arc of immigration in even in a Canadian city that I've ever seen.
Well, that's right, and there's always been flows of. There's always been an Afro-Hamilton population in the 19th century. I believe Concession Street was a black community there at a certain point, and we've had people from China, Italy, a strong Italian component to the city, and it's Jewish population. Now we've got more people who are South Asian moving in, Afro-Canadian, and the city is changing. I mean, it's not as multicultural as Toronto, but I think it's because of the inexpensive housing. People are moving here, and so the city is having to make adjustments, and I think that's what Sarah writes about, just the adjustments it has to make to be welcoming and accept the diversity, because that's always an issue for cities that are monocultural. And there's always tension, but so far, right today, I think it's been a positive. Obviously, diversity is a very positive thing, and I look forward to seeing more of it in the
Yeah,
future.
yeah. And she wrote a wonderful essay. It's interesting to actually see it from the very beginning to the modern day. It's a really good survey of all the different ways and all the different people. But when we come to all the people coming to Hamilton now, then we start to get into the problems with gentrification. And it was good that we had Sean Selway to take on some of that for us.
Right. Now, I don't think it's I think there's a tendency in Hamilton to blame outsiders for the rise of housing and gentrification. I mean, the land is going to become more expensive. It's the nature of our capitalist system. And if we're going to get into affordable housing, I mean, we used to have more government intervention, now we have less. And Hamilton's a perfect laboratory for that because of a strong labor history, progressive movements. And so it's going to be interesting to see how we deal with affordable housing in the future.
Yeah. Well, in the study that Sean has given us in his essays, talk about a lot of the zonings and a lot of the fights to keep things affordable.
Right.
And
yes.
sort of covers that.
He's has a lot of interesting analysis as a tenant organizer about real estate development and speculation, and he's really up there in the front lines of landlord-tenant relations and friction.
Yeah. Well, and then on the other end, then we have the essay that we close with from Matthew Bin.
Right.
About the arc of the Hamilton Tiger Cats. And when you first told me about that essay, I was like,
skeptical.
Okay, how is this going to fit? How is this going to work?
Yeah.
But it's really a beautiful discussion of how the Tiger Cats were a symbol and a place of meeting for so much of Hamilton, and how they've kind of arced and fallen.
Well, it's part of Hamilton's civic culture. It's the only professional team the city has. I know it's always wanted a hockey team, and because of the closeness with Buffalo and Toronto, it's another curse for Hamilton. It can't get its own hockey team, but there's a football team, and it'll be interesting to see what happens post-COVID, because the CFL has had some serious difficulty making adjustments. All the professional leagues have had. So, no, the timing is good for Matthew's article. It was really great that he wrote it, and it ends the book beautifully. Actually, I think.
I think it's a really good ending.
Yeah.
Well, just before that, we have a wonderful article from Jessica Rose as well,
Right.
which actually talks about some really creative ways that people are creating community in the city.
Well, I asked Jessica to write it because I was aware of these little groups of people trying to, like setting up an art installation in a park, or reopening the Westdale, just little that sort of symbolize a spirit in the city, changing the city. I mean, she writes about an interesting woman named Fatima, who's from Brazil, and she organized these art installations. She started a cafe. She wanted to show films, but the bureaucratic nature of City Hall prevented her from showing regular films. So she got into doing these art installations, and I asked Jessica, who is an established professional writer, to do a piece about these little projects that help to make the city better, and are quite symbolic, but are also important.
I think they were lovely. Though we also have much larger projects that people have taken to try to make the city better, and I'm thinking of sort of the Sky Dragon.
Right.
A really good article in there from Kevin McKay about sort of his experiences with the Sky Dragon from the very, very beginning to the current day.
And in a nutshell, Kevin and a group of people thought they could buy a building, and when buildings were cheap in downtown, it was depressed, and the concept of ethical development, they would do interesting things with the buildings. So they had Homegrown Hamilton, which was an open mic kind of place where people could, folk singers and comedians, but it had a rough edge to it, and it hasn't lasted. And what the article's about is the ideals of doing ethical development, a building with alternative uses, and the struggles to do that. And that's what the article's about. And it's quite an honest piece by Kevin. He lives in the building. There's been all kinds of things have come and gone through that building. So it's an interesting piece.
It's a wonderful piece. And when I first set up my office in downtown Hamilton, there was nowhere to go get a coffee. until the Sky Dragon opened.
Right, they had the bread and roses coffee.
They had the bread and roses.
Right.
But it was staffed by volunteers.
That's right.
And we loved the place, but it would always take a very long time to get a cup of coffee there. And we always used to joke that if you were going to ask the anarchists to make you a coffee, you just gave them lots of time to do it. But it was wonderful because it was a new meeting place.
Right.
And it was welcoming, and it felt very much that anybody could go in there and get that coffee and be part of a new community. And it was to me, it was like the first sign that people were coming to that downtown. Well, it wasn't quite the first sign, but it was a real sign that there was a different way of doing things in Hamilton.
That's right, because the lower city was really neglected. It was like all the action of people was in the mountain. People had left the lower city to live in suburban homes, and so it was the population had declined. The downtown was extremely depressed. It was dangerous. And so there was a revival, and our book is really kind of timed with that revival. Of course, I think what we lament is that the revival hasn't, and I'm using the word revival, reclaiming or improving, hasn't affected the whole lower city. It's mostly certain pockets, like even downtown. It's still a little depressed around Gore Park. I mean, it's a lovely park. And I love going to the Red Church, but it's still a little depressed. James Street North is kind of and King William are the lively spots in that area. But so I mean, it's a the city is a work in progress. I think we mostly do talk about the lower city, although Margaret Skimbuff in her first piece does deal with the kind of the splits between the lower city and the upper city, and I try to do that in my own piece as well. It has It makes the city vibrant in a way, but it's also not an easy place to run. Different perspectives.
No, I would say that most people who've been watching Hamilton City Council over the years would say that this is all an interesting city.
A lot of cities have this problem. Toronto has also an inner suburb, outer suburb kind of thing, and I'm sure in Montreal and Vancouver they have these issues as well. But in Hamilton, because we have a geographical reality of the Niagara Escarpment, it cements that difference in a way. It's not a blurring of the lines kind of thing.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So, well, we've got all these wonderful essays that you've curated and that you've brought together. Multiple drafts, and some of these are writers who've never been published before, so this is their first physical publication in a book, such as Seema Narula, who gave us a really wonderful essay about being a black artist, being an artist of color in Hamilton, and how difficult it was in profiling some fabulous people in the city.
That's right, and I think it still continues to be an issue, the issue of racism and just and finding your place in a city where obviously there's people done things in a certain way, and then you have, well, these could be new people or they could be people who've lived here generations and still face barriers. So her article encapsulates some of those issues, I think.
I think it's a wonderful article, and I think with all these things together. So when this book goes out into the world, and we've actually had a lot of interest in the book, we had already had some wonderful reviews for it.
Wow.
We're hoping that it's going to continue the discussions, right?
That's the whole point of a book like this, is to get people talking.
Yeah.
Yeah, and and it's a series of topics, and obviously we don't deal with every issue in the city. It's difficult, but we try to deal with a lot of things that are topical, and keep in mind that when we put this together, in a way, it was the city that we visioned 3 years ago, and the city is constantly changing, and there are things we don't have in it. It's only because they weren't issues 3 years ago, because that's how we recruited people and got them writing, and it does take a while to put the thing together. But I think it's still relevant, obviously.
And we were putting in the last minute revisions up until almost we went to press, where we actually managed to get in the Coots Paradise sewer spills, and we managed to talk a little tiny bit about COVID-19, but we could have literally been updating essays in there. We would have never published the book because these stories are never stopping.
Well, I mean, the LRT is the perfect example. We just didn't know. Ryan had to struggle, and he's got a very strong technical background, and so he understands the transit. But just getting into the end, how is it going to end? And we still don't know. But then maybe that's the add to the suspense. It's on
don't
this
know.
ongoing story about the city.
Well, and the city is kind of like that. We don't know what's going to happen next.
Right.
You know, but if we can bring these kinds of books out and we can give these writers a voice and a place
That's
and have
right.
people talk about these issues, then we can really impact where the city goes in the future.
And get more people writing. And maybe this is a way to encourage other writers to also think about writing their own impressions of the city too. New writers who come out of the woodwork. I'm hoping that this book will inspire more thought and discussion about the city. And all cities, actually.
It would be good to see like articles like this and to see these kinds of collections. We see them sometimes from Toronto, and we see different kinds of books like this, but we don't have a lot of these kinds of writings that have been captured and put together about Hamilton. So this is, I think this is a really groundbreaking.
It's unusual, it's new.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be an important collection.
Well, I'm looking forward to hearing the reaction from people. I think it's very exciting. It's all very exciting.
That's cool. All right. And we're actually almost out of time here, Paul.
Okay.
So I'm going to kind of close this down, and I'm going to thank you so much for sitting here with us.
Thank you, Noelle.
And talking to our audience. And I'm hoping that people love this book. This book is available at all of our local bookstores. It's available everywhere that anybody can buy it. But we do specifically know that it is going to be at King West, it's going to be at Epic, it's going to be at City in the City.
This is in Hamilton for all those non-Hamilton viewers.
I should specify, these are all wonderful. We are really blessed in Hamilton to have wonderful local bookstores like these.
But if you don't live in Hamilton, there are independent bookstores you can order from.
They are everywhere. And so I hope you would be interested enough to go and pick up a copy and read it, and we would love to hear what anybody thinks about it. And our next panel is going to be on at 7 o'clock. So we hope everybody will come back and join us then. And we are going to be talking about where the city came from, which is the first one. So we're more of the introduction here. And we're going to talk about the history of the city. And we're going to actually have 3 people from the anthology we mentioned already tonight. We're going to have Margaret Shakimba, we're going to have Sarah Wayland, we're going to have Matthew Bin, and we're going to be talking about 3 different historical aspects of the city, what's happened in the past, and sort of how that's going to create how that has created the foundations for our present and probably for our future. So thank you all very much.
Thank you.